Welcome everyone to our 57th webinar here on and this is one that we've been chatting about a little bit for the last few days, and one that we're really looking forward to. This one is we're gonna talk about is determining your and their data analysis learning styles. This is something that I've been a trainer for, a trainer in a previous job, and then of course here with aimsports, and doing seminars and webinars and chatting with people. I mean, daily on the phone and in email, and these learning styles are something that have just been one of those things that have been as soon as you start chatting with somebody, you have a little bit of small talk back and forth. You understand what their problem is, and it's kind of my job is try to figure out the best way to explain something and answer their question. If their question is very specific about a function, that's one thing. But if they're trying to say, how do I understand how to do this? So what we do, and the software is really good about this, and it's probably it's a source of pride for us, is that you may want to look at something, but yet there might be 3 or 4 different ways of doing that. And because of that, we it is a goal. It is something that we should chat about, is to understand that there are different learning styles and different ways of learning from the software and different tools inside of it. So a few weeks ago, James Colborn on the line with us here. James sent me a note and said, Roger, how about this? How about this as a topic? Let's chat about how we can learn, how individuals learn, and then how to tie that together, of course, with data analysis. So I'd like to do that, and so we chatted about it a little bit, and this is our date. So I'd like to introduce James. This is James's 5th YouTube webinar of this series that he's co-hosted with us. All of them have been extremely well received. Lots of emails, lots of notes from lots of folks, and of course we want to have him back as often as we can. And then this topic on top of it being extremely cool to talk about. So I'd love to have James just go through a little bit about yourself, James, kind of where in the background. And when you get done with that, let's start off with one of our polls, and then we're going to jump into learning styles. To give us a little bit about you, James, and what got you here.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having me back. I think the best way to describe me is someone who just enjoys all aspects of motorsports and most particularly car racing. And one of the things that I figured out very early on in my club racing is that data is without doubt one of the best ways of being able to find improvement. And I'm one of those people who chips away at something over time. I don't have that necessary natural ability to be able to go fast very quickly. And so data was a great way of me being able to identify how to move my racing potential forward a little bit, and I've used it ever since. But interestingly, when the first AIM Solo came out, it became very popular very quickly, and I think that I learned how to read the data a little bit instead of how to use it, and a lot of people were interested in terms of how I was doing it. So I put some videos on YouTube just to share with people, and sort of haven't looked back since in terms of developing more. And as I learn, I sort of sometimes put it online for people to be able to follow along. And so it's just given me a great experience, as somebody who generally loves to help people out with data as well. So, the data analysis has been a key part of my life now for, coming up on, the videos have been around for probably 8 years, but even longer than that, probably a decade or so of using data. And so it's just lovely to be back here and starting to share some of the experiences I've had over the last however many years.
Yeah, it's James and I first met. He was living here in my area, and met him at the racetrack a couple of times, and then I was doing a couple of AIM seminars locally, and I think you came to 2 or 3 of the local ones. Certainly all of them that were here locally. Got to meet you, and then it was pretty clear that that you were a student of this, not only the sport but of the data side as well, which is to kind of tie it back together with training. That is as the person that's giving the training, and you see somebody that is so willing and actively trying to suck up all the information. It's all that makes it a joy to do the training on top of it. And so you stood out to me when that time was when we were doing those back then. So the again, thank you for coming and doing this. I know these things take a lot of time and preparation, and you're a busy guy, and so we certainly do appreciate that. The let's start off with the poll, as we almost always do here. Let's launch that poll. This is one that we start off with a lot. I've been tracking this, and so that's why we do this one almost every time. And what this is, when you watch this back on YouTube, you don't see the panel, so I tend to describe it almost every time. So, what aimsports hardware do you own and use? And select all that apply. You have multiple choice, and of course the last one there is. Since we only have 10 boxes, 10 answers available to us, you've got the option of SmartyCam /other. And if it's other, go ahead and plug other equals whatever it happens to be into the chat box, and that helps me track this, and we see how things are kind of changing, and then we adjust our topics. So keep that in mind. One thing while that one is playing out, let's give it about a minute, and then I will end the polling. Something I've started to do, and if you look back on the webinar from Matt Romanowski, number the one previous to this one, one of the things I've done is I've added to the timeline. I've added the chapters or a timeline bar to make it, and I was thinking of it while chatting and thinking about this particular webinar right here, learning styles. Is people open up these 1 hour long webinars, and they, okay, I wanted to find that piece about X, right? And now if you open up the YouTube videos, and I'm gonna start working backwards from the newest one back, and start adding these chapter tags in there. So if you hover over the timeline on last Thursday's webinar with Matt Romanowski, if you hover over it, it's going to tell you what part it's in and how long that topic is, and you can jump right to different topics. So that'll be very helpful. So that's because I know that I've gotten some information back from folks saying, yeah, I know it was in there, but where was that piece where you were talking about that particular function, right? So we're trying to do some of that is put chapter tags in those things. Okay, let's end that polling, and let's get that out of the way, and then James, I think we'll give you the remote control so you can take over the mouse and go wherever you would like to go. Looks like you're in control. Click on that, right. Go to the next slide, and you should be off and running. Everybody enjoy yourselves. This is a topic that both James and I are pretty passionate about.
Thanks, Roger. So I want to start out with really a statement, and the statement is that while for my work I do a little bit of training with people as part of my role, obviously at the track I'm helping a lot of people in relation to what the data is saying and where it's going, and having done a few bits and pieces here and there, this is self-taught. And so if any of you are educators or qualified educators, you might start finding holes. If you do, please comment in the chat box, tell us your thoughts and feedback, because we want to be able to make sure that this is as interactive as possible. But a lot of what this is coming from is the fact that I've been fortunate enough over the last however many years to be able to sit down with all sorts of different drivers, from those who have never ever plugged in their aim solo thinking it was a lap timer, to those who've had the most advanced setups and have the ability to be able to see something very quickly in the data. And the conversation that you have changes depending on who they are. But what we've also figured out is the fact that while the base foundation of the data often remains the same, the beauty of the software that you're available to use here, and interesting, I'll evolve this to having a conversation about hardware as well, which I've personally liked in a lot of the evolution that we've had with some of the AIM devices over the last few years, is to be able to address that when you're actually in the car as well. And so to be able to sort of make that more, I'm clicking, is this moving? There we go. Yeah, I don't want to click too far because I got excited and made this a build today. Is that there's an element of this which is identifying your learning style, and more importantly, chances are many of you who are on this call today also teach other people. and it's something that this community does a lot of, is that they help and they teach individuals about things they've seen and have worked with the data. And so knowing how individuals actually respond changes the way that you may sort of talk about that base foundation of data. And when I talk about the base foundation of data, we're talking about the channels that you often see available for you to be able to use. It might be GPS based. It might be based upon driver inputs such as throttle position sensor or brake pedal. But at the end of the day, it's based upon the same foundation, but can be displayed differently. So just to put that now, interestingly, I went online and there was an awful lot of discussion available. It's interesting today. You could teach yourself everything on YouTube and get 90% wrong. But at the same time, these 4 related to me, but there are arguments that there's 7 and 9 and all sorts of different ways that people learn. But I thought these 4 were particularly useful because I could relate to them. The first are visual learners, those who enjoy videos, they attend seminars. You've got the auditory learners, those who love listening to podcasts, listening to YouTube channels. It's funny how much listening happens on YouTube as well. Maybe it's in the background in terms of what's going on. Then you have those who take great delight in reading blogs. And, I'm one of those, for example, when it comes to the reading blogs, who'd rather read information sometimes and see it in a video. Because if I go to a news channel and I have to watch the news story, or I can skim read the article and I can see the information I want immediately, that's the type of sort of scenario. And so I'm not necessarily saying which one of these I relate to. And then you've got the kinesthetic, those people who are hands-on. And in each of these areas, there are different styles of ways that you can relate to these individuals, from visual learners who like things they need to be visual, graphic imagery, graphic imagery, that's a terrible thing to say, graphics or imagery in relation to pictures or charts. Most of what we look at today when we think about AIM data really does relate in that particular area. But the same thing would potentially apply to the reading side as well. And if we think about a lot of what we look at, sometimes people want to be able to skim a measures graph, or more importantly, when we think about, for example, the channels report, which has been one of my absolute favorite things that I've learned to develop through these webinars, has been, really focusing on, that sort of the aspect of really finding that information very quickly in a different format than necessarily seeing it in graph format. And so, each of these have been, and then you've got your, let's say, the kinesthetic side, where, people here are definitely in the area of hands-on. They like to, I did a bit of research here, and they said, if you're talking to someone who's, kinesthetic in terms of the way they learn, they like to act or trace. And so it's interesting how many people at the end of these webinars ask for the data, because they will indeed take that data and mimic or trace what they've seen as part of the way that they potentially work through this.
It was actually when we first started this, that one there surprised me more than anything. It was at first we didn't put the links up and didn't assume people would want that. They would watch the video back, they would listen to it, they'd use it in their own data. But the amount of people that wanted to be able to bring the video back up when it was recorded on YouTube and have the actual data and walk through with the person that was demonstrating it was surprising to me. And so I tend to, the question that I would bring up a little bit is yeah, we've got it broken up into 4, like you said, that there was, that some people will say as many as 7 or 9. Do you find that there is crossover, that somebody may be strongly one way, but they have a secondary that they tend to follow as well? I
think so. And so it's interesting, in the research that I did, people will typically respond to 2 or 3, but they will have a preference for 1.
Okay.
And then they said there's always a relative preference, but in nature of what we're, the constraints of what we operate within, sometimes we have to develop a skill like the visual learning, which is a lot to what we do with data and what we do with the analysis of data. So much of that is visual, but we can take it forward. The interesting one that I loved as I was going through this as well was with the auditory one, when they were saying about things that people do to be able to learn on the auditory side, is they talk to themselves. And so in that instance, have you ever been in the race car and you've been driving around and you've talked to yourself and told yourself to do something at a certain point, or don't do it like that, or if it's anything like me, don't do it like that, you bleep. But in general, it's sort of, there is an element of people talk themselves through a lot of aspects of it as well. and sometimes we don't know what our particular learning style is. And so as I was writing these out, each one of them, I was like, well, I kind of do that there and I do that there. But it's important to be able to find which way that you relate to, because here's the key. If we're helping other people with data as well, I also believe it's really important to be able to help them how they develop. And I also think the other thing which is fascinating too, is the fact that as you develop a level of understanding and comprehension as it relates to data, your learning style might change. And I think that comes down to the fact that depending on your level of comfort with data, the way that you get someone engaged may differ depending on their level of understanding. And when the reason I thought this topic was really interesting is that the first time I plugged in, and you get it the other day, I did a new install the other day, is the first time you see the measures graph, it might as well, for a first-time beginner, just have that sort of Halloween shriek of scariness as you turn it on, going, oh my God, what on earth is this? I have no idea what I'm looking at. And I think that, you know, over time, then all of a sudden it starts to develop. And as you learn a certain skill, you start to be able to say, okay, I'm more comfortable with that and move forward. So I think that's important. But what I also did on this was I thought, well, let's start thinking about it in areas where we can start putting into you know, different types of ways of looking at it. Now, auditory and kinesthetic, these are more experiences of you know, you can work on the experiences yourself by mimicking or tracing, but it's not really something that you can do within the tool necessarily. It's something that you do with the tool or with the software. But what I wanted to do on the left-hand side is be able to say, are there types of data that vary depending on the type of learner you are? And so if you're a visual learner, and I don't think I've seen a seminar, if I have, I've missed it, on the lap replay analysis. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, because it's one of those features that you play with at the beginning of your, you know, evolution with the data. And if I showed it to somebody who knows the data really well, they'd just sort of giggle and go, that's not really for me. But then if it was somebody else who, for example, was new to the data the first time, they may be like, ooh, that's starting to show me something because I can relate to it, and it's got a sort of a context to it. Measures graph. I think these can be read, but they're also relatively visual as well because they're graphs. SmartyCams. It's funny, we think of SmartyCams, and I don't think if we do, but this is generally in my head, and when we talk about it with people, a SmartyCam is often thought of as an evolution of your use of data. If we think about your entry level into a lot of what you do with data, I would say, and I imagine I see it from the polls, the entry that a lot of people have is with GPS-based solo data. But depending on if you want to be able to provide people with context as to what's happening on screen, one of the best ways of being able to see what you're doing that you can relate to is having a video that you can then start to add additional layers over the top. But even if you don't have that SmartyCam, the next area, and you know, having done these videos for a while, the third most popular, we could do a poll. What do you think the most popular video is that I have on my YouTube channel? The third most popular channel that is always every month consistently is being able to overlay laps on Google Earth. Now, Emiliano is going to put my YouTube success completely, you know, out of business with the fact that it's going to be baked into Ray Studio 3 analysis already. But it's indicative of the fact that we're in a position where people want that visual context as to what's happening and they can relate. Yeah. Same thing that exists, you know, with the GPS map. So these are more visual. And then you've got the reading side, measures graph, but the channels report. Channels report isn't something you'd look at and go, that's pretty. It's something you look at if you want to be able to see something very quickly. Same thing with split times report. And so being able to develop an understanding of how people will relate to this data is hugely important, in my view anyway. And I'm sure some would agree, some didn't. But here's the thing that I think is interesting, and I'm going to focus on this a little bit at the very end. And thanks to Matt Ramanowski, he has provided me with, well, he's provided all of us, and I happen to have used it, data from Ray Studio 3 analysis with a little bit of video as well, is you can also add different aspects to this. Thanks, Matt. I was delighted to be able to use your data. For those who are people who like sort of relating and reading, you know, a lot of information on the dash is super important for many of us. And I think I'm one of these. It's like anyone who's ever talked to a race engineer on the radio, or I've had some, race engineer. Sounds like I'm in Formula One. Has anyone talked to someone who's had a headset on when you're doing an endurance race and they're talking to you? I'm like, James, you're not saying very much. It's like, no, I'm busy driving. You know, it's kind of what I do. But in many respects, I also find the busyness of a dash kind of overwhelming sometimes. And so from a visual point of view, I may just want a simple sort of display. And so there's this LED predictive lab, which we'll focus on a bit later, which has been one of the best advancements in my view, from the Solo 2 all the way up to using a shift light indicator as a predictive lap indicator. It just makes it easier to be able to visualize if you're doing something better or not. Whereas some people are like, well, how much am I up and how well am I doing? And you know, is this lap number 5 and how fast was I going in this corner? It varies depending on the sort of how you want to be able to see that data and how you relate to it. So that's the first thing they want to be able to look at. And the most important things for everyone here is to be able to say, well, how do I identify, you know, where I am? And I think that there's a lot of information there. Chances are you're going to be on this left-hand side in relation to how you learn. And on the right-hand side is going to relate to how you use the tool to be able to develop, you know, your experiences in many respects. So this is the first sort of approach that we wanted to have a look at. And so that, to me, has been a real sort of eye-opener. And it's something, I'll tell you how I've been self-taught on this one, has been largely due to the fact that the videos that I've put on YouTube have varied so dramatically in relation to, I would never have guessed that people would have liked the lap replay analysis. It's something that I didn't look at. But interestingly, I started out with a different software. I won't tell you which one, but it started out with a hardware and device that was its main display. And you know, it was something I could relate to, but it wasn't long until I was like, okay, I need a bit more, and I got sort of data hungry, and then just turned into as somebody who likes more channels than their car can cope with, which is interestingly enough why I don't have some data right now, because I think I overloaded my system.
Interesting. Before we move on from this screen, let's do a second poll, and let everybody, now that we've kind of chatted a little bit about, we've broken it up into these 4 learning styles. Let's take a look at a different poll, which, if I can bring it up, there we go. What do you what kind of learning style do you relate to the best? You know, you have to pick one of them, and so it's not multiple. But let's let that go, James, for about a minute or so, and then we'll share the results, and it'll be interesting to see how people you know, see themselves as being there. You talked about the Google Earth overlay, and Matt talking about it as well just the other day in a webinar that we did. One of the kind of cool things on the Google Earth overlay, why folks are taking the poll, is in the new Ray Studio 3, which you'll show. You won't show this particular function, I suppose, or at this depth. But one of the things that he found was interesting, and it struck a nerve with me as well. You could have a Google Earth overlay map of the entire track, and then you could have another one to set up a second one and zoom in it. So now you're looking at exactly where you are in the corner, and yet you can glance over and see see where you are in the bigger picture of the track. Now, the racers out there might think this a little bit funny, but I'm not a racer, and I certainly these tracks that I do tons of data work on, I'm not intimately familiar with those tracks, right? So having that, being able even to have 2 of those up, one zoomed in, one out to the full extent of the track, has been very helpful. So interesting how you've broken this up, and let's go ahead and let's end that poll, and let's share it and let everybody take a look at it. I'm going to end the poll, and then let's share the results. There are the results. It's kind of interesting that, and again, YouTube doesn't show the results, so I like to read them off a little bit. But what kind of learning style do you relate to the most? Visual was 43% of the folks that took the poll. Auditory, 2%. A little bit surprised that it was quite that low, but the kinesthetic, 29%. So that was the second place one. The next one was the read and write. You know, you got to get in there and actually take a look at it. And then a combination was 12%. So there's a number of people, and I kind of feel I'm in that way as well. I'm a visual. And maybe James, you give everybody a little bit of feedback now that they've voted, but I'm visual for the most part. That's the main one. But then for it to sink in for me, to actually get it to settle in, is that kinesthetic. I actually have to actually get in there and do it a little bit. then I end up with with some really good information in my head and it sticks. What is your overall trend that you follow, James?
So I've sort of evolved. I will always go to visual, and it's interesting. One of the things that somebody asked me once upon a time was, if you've got, and we did it, I think we did one of the webinars, I may have commented, if you've only got a few minutes between sessions, what do you look at in terms of the data to be able to find improvement? 9 times out of 10, I would be SmartyCam.
Yeah.
Because I've got to the point now where in detailed analysis, I could get into the finer details, but for me, a SmartyCam, I can look at very quickly and know which corners my foot is doing this on the accelerator or the brake, and be able to identify certain key aspects and start, then interestingly, I talk to myself, as we all do to some degree. And so, visual has always been something which I've related to, but then as I look through it, and went into some of the detail, there are some other aspects which I can relate to from the auditory point of view. There's the talking to yourself sort of part of it. And it's a strange thing, but I rarely ever at the end of the webinars will take someone else's data and use it. I'll want to use it on my own stuff. So I'm not necessarily someone who does the sort of like the mimic or trace, but I still want to have the hands-on experience of doing it myself, which is kind of key. So I'm a bit of a combination, but I think we're all relatively, visual, but we do use a combination, but it's important to relate, especially, and I'll get into it on the next slide as to where it sort of fits. From my experience, where the level of ability with data changes the way that you talk to somebody and changes the way you demonstrate that data. And interestingly, one of the scenarios, it was a few race meetings ago, where I had somebody who'd never seen the data before. And so I felt like one of those areas where I had a menu of options and I was like, how about this view? And sort of you could read immediately like, no, not getting it. And then you're like, how about this view? And they're like, okay, that's kind of cool. And interestingly, in that dialogue, and when we got to channels report, it was almost like a light bulb moment. They were like, oh, I can see, yeah, that, and I'll show you some live demos of the different areas that are show data. Because remember, the basis of what we're talking about is that the source of the data that is coming from, either the GPS movements of whatever device we're looking at or the inputs of the driver always stays the same, but it's how you adapt that, makes a difference. And so what I wanted to do was actually show that in the context of excessive clicking. Hold on, sorry about that. Oops.
You jumped ahead a little. There you go.
Getting a bit carried away there. So the first thing I want to be able to do is to be able to say, well, which ones of these, and it's not necessary. Roger, when we talked about a poll, maybe we should have done a poll on these ones. I was like, no, I can't think of a poll that people would probably think of in this one. And then there's a slide where I have a question, which is, which one of these do you relate to? Yeah, having a bit of a moment there. It was in terms of what it is. So you don't need to answer. It's a bit of a rhetorical question, but in relation to which forms of analysis do you relate to? And everyone relates differently. Some people like me may go, yeah, all of them, because I generally do. And you can see me slowly paging through my profiles, sitting sort of in the corner of the garage, clicking through different things that I want to be able to look at. But as said, if I had no time at all to be able to look, I'd probably be on the SmartyCam, which is where I'd look first of all. Some people sort of, really like the measures graph. And when I say some people, I think all of us, we're trained to do that. Yeah. In many respects, because it's the default, it's where we go to, it's where most of our conversation has been in many of these webinars. But if I'm talking to somebody who's never plugged in their device before, that lap replay analysis is a huge plus, because it starts to put movement and a visual element associated with something that can be related to, which is a track map. And so again, the measures graph is great, and you can build your track map. A number of times that people ask constantly, how do I build a track map? Because that's the next evolution, because what's happening in my view, and you might all agree or disagree, is that people are looking at the measures graph going, I don't get where I am on track. Yeah. With the lap replay analysis, arguably you would be in a position to say, oh, I know where I am on track, because I can see that, I'll give somebody a prize if they can tell me in the chat what racetrack this is as well. The prize being well done. But it just shows us there's a different sort of approach. The channels report has no context to it as well. So, you know, it's just being able to find which one you relate to. And so what I've found is that it depends on who you're talking to. So this was taught to me by Ross Bentley, but it's been in subsequent lots of trainings and things that I've seen. And this is something that I absolutely love, because it helps me when I start talking to people about data when I'm talking to them, which is when you start out, and we could say time of comfort and time of being able to learn. If you're starting out with data, and remember, all of you have probably experienced that day where you first started looking at, in fact, some of the comments that I saw earlier, somebody said, you know, the first time I looked at it, I had to go and grab somebody at the track to be able to explain what I'm looking for, which is the genesis of how a lot of the YouTube videos that I created were there, was because I was answering the same questions a lot. And I'm like, well, I can help some people here. Is I don't know what I'm looking at, and I've no idea if I'm doing it right or wrong. And so that's been a huge sort of area where you start people out, and then you get into, okay, so I know what I should be doing, but I just can't do it. Now this could relate to two pieces. This could relate to how you use the software, or it could relate to how you're driving in relation with the data, because there's a few things there. A number of times I've shown people, they're like, I know what I'm kind of looking at here, but how did I get here? Or how did you get me here in relation to the analysis in terms of looking at the data? But then most of the time, some people have said Silverstone, which it's not, but it's a good guess. It's close. Well, close in relation to most tracks in the US in terms of distance. But it's a small track in Wiltshire. Let's put it that way. So conscious incompetence is like, okay, I'm getting aware of what I should be doing, but I don't know how I need to be doing it. And again, this is using the data to be able to relate to what's happening on track. Then there's the conscious competence. This is step by step. I have to really think about it. I have to really sort of put some thought into it. But if I think about it, I can do it. And then we get into the super skilled phase, which is the unconscious competence. And so when you think about data, if you were talking to a pro driver, or, you know, it's funny, I'm looking at Roger on the screen right now. If I send some data to Roger, or we're doing a demonstration on screen, it is within less than a second that Roger has found the point on the lap where there's an issue that needs to be resolved. He's in that unconscious competent. Castle Coombe. Well done. And so Roger's in that unconscious competence. He knows exactly where, you know, he sees things because he does it so often, and there's a comfort with that, and so it moves forward. And so the reason that there's an arrow that points backwards is that, for me personally, depending on the level that I'm going, these webinars have pushed me backwards, back down the competence curve brilliantly, I might add. And so much of what I do now has been developed from the learnings that I've had from the individuals that have been on this webinar, some with a hands-on experience, some by nature of the fact that I've seen people do it. And I've got to say that there are some things that if somebody showed me written down a math channel formula, you'd see me go sort of boss-eyed, and I go, yeah, totally get it. Don't get it at all. I would be, you know, but then somebody shows me the graphic of saying this arrow, if it goes down really hard, that's brake aggressiveness. And if it goes down harder on this brake point than this one, you're braking harder here. I'm like, why didn't you say so? And so there's a different way of looking at it. And so I visually learned from many of these. So what I wanted to do was to demonstrate that I think there are 3 steps here in my experience as to getting people to move up this particular point. So the first, and you'd be interested to note that I've put SmartyCam right at the top. If you don't have a SmartyCam, the lap replay is absolutely fantastic for doing this as well, is that all of a sudden you can create a visual connection with the driver and the data. Remember, your goal, if you're learning the data or you're helping people learn the data, is to be able to demonstrate what they're doing on track is visible in the data, and that there's things that they could do which would improve their driving. It's like, stop doing that type of thing, right?
Making
so
that connection, between what you're looking at and what you feel.
Absolutely right, Roger. We've got to make the connection. And so if the first thing you see is a busy measures graph, that connection is hard. It genuinely is hard. But at the same time, we can get there with a basic measures graph. And many of you may have seen videos of things that I've done in the past. The first few videos I ever produced, I just used GPS longitudinal. Why? because down means brake and up means accelerate to some degree, or one slowing down and one speeding up. It's an easy correlation to be able to start identifying that. And then you move forward. And so this is super important, especially for those of you who are coaches, to be able to make sure that you can start relating. And remember, most of us will probably show our friends what we're doing with the data, or we'll discuss it with each other. And so we're all coaches, we're all tutors in this respect, and this sort of experience. But there will be those moments when you talk to somebody who's never, ever looked at this before. And it surprises me today how often that happens. But it is one of the most enjoyable moments when you can show somebody something and they're like, oh, I kind of get that. That's cool. So that's the first step. The next is to get people up to the step by step. And I think this is, you know, how do I start getting people more into the, okay, I should be doing that more. And I think that this is sort of an advanced stage where things haven't changed too much, but at the same time, we're still using, I think SmartyCam should be used by every single person for everything. And it's not because, you know, I'm showing bias, although I do think it's one of the best things ever, is that there is nothing better than that visual reference of video with the driver inputs at the same time. That it genuinely nothing better, because when you get more and more advanced, you can start saying, I've just seen that in the SmartyCam data, now I'm going to look at the measures graph, or vice versa. And this is where we'll tie it all together with Ray Studio 3 analysis. You could do it both at the same time, but it's how do you sort of correlate that? But I also think at this point, you start adding in the channels reports, which, you know, get particularly interesting. I think channels reports is hard to do if you don't know math channels, because, or you've got an advanced setup where you can see RPMs and throttle positions. You need a bit of sort of advanced there, but that gets you in sort of like the real third phase, which is, I've got to be honest, I didn't use math channels for a long time, an absolute age. The measures graphs that I used were always relatively basic. But when you start getting comfortable with what you're seeing, and you're in that, okay, I don't need to think about this now, I can see that data straight away. How do you keep pushing yourself to be able to see more data, to see more analysis? If you started playing with these aspects in point number 3 down here, I think you'd lose your audience forever. And that's why you'd see a lot of people continue using a solo as a lap timer. And if they're doing that, fair play to them, because one of the things that you've got to think about is the fact that the same base data is the same. The only difference is that a solo is displaying that on a dash that's on your on your, you know, stuck on your windscreen or on the dash of your car. It's the same data being visualized a different way. And so as a result, it's just how people want. But I think that sometimes seeing seminars, seeing data, seeing software absolutely scares people. And so being able to see how you can get that sort of conversation going. So that's what I wanted to be able to sort of look at a little bit now. I wanted to be able to pick a few of the points in these 3 areas. For many of you, some of you are going to be like, okay, that makes perfect sense. But I've picked the data examples to be able to demonstrate how you can show people data in different ways. And so instead of talking about it, I was going to show it. But the most important thing to know is that the audience that you're talking to, you've got to figure out if they like numbers, if they like graphs, if they like images. And more than anything else, I've personally experienced that even if someone's not a visual learner, the context you get from being able to show somebody a track with a dot on it that's moving, as an example, has huge value in evolving their level of conversation, because now they can start seeing what they're looking at. So that's where I'll finish this piece. Roger, I don't know if you had another a poll to go through. If not, we can switch to a live demo.
I do not, but these webinars I'll unshare the screen here in just a second. I wanted to talk just a second about this as myself. Sometimes doing these webinars are fairly easy for me. Sometimes they're extremely hard. This is one that's a little bit hard, because this is this is a topic that is near and dear, and you have laid it out so well that I wanted to add a couple things, but you said most of it. And this competence over time graph that you've built here is while it is good to talk about in the form of motorsports and data analysis, it fits everything that I've ever, it fits the worldview, right? Everything in my life that I have ever learned about, I walk through these exact same steps. And like you, it has been introduced to me a number of years ago, this basic idea. And then I saw this arrow at the top, And that was the one that I wanted to more mention on, where you have curved the arrow back, and I think most people don't understand that, and I was so happy to see that you did that, because just for me, somebody that does this data analysis thing 8 hours a day, 7 days a week for the most part since March, the the uh, that whole thing of relearning or learning more, and getting to a point where where you're fairly comfortable. These webinars, I have learned more since starting these webinars than I probably have in the last 3 or 4 years, and it's because of the preparations, the questions, all these things that are happening. I always go back and I go, oh, wait a minute, there's something there that I didn't understand fully, or now I want to learn a little bit more about that, so I just wanted to talk about this bar one more time, as you're kind of as we're getting ready to jump into some live data, that I find this to be stunningly accurate, and I think I am so glad you're here talking about it today. So,
I could not agree with you more. And one of the things that's really important is this little arrow for me varies depending on what I'm looking at. And this subject here in particular, this arrow went all the way here. I knew what was going on, but I had no idea how to do it. And that was just the different comprehension of the software. But in doing so, it's also improved my driving as well, because there are different sort of aspects of the way that the math channels are showing me data, especially on the sort of GPS data in particular, that I just have to say that, for everyone who I've learned from on these webinars, thank you, because it's helped me an absolute ton. And I feel a bit like a magpie sometimes, that I'm like, oh, thanks very much, let me make a video about that.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah,
I think
me
that,
too.
that is something which, because I've genuinely enjoyed learning it. So
yeah, me too. And one last thing, the SmartyCam, you had it at the top. You mentioned that, and that fits how you do things. There was a couple of comments in the chat that talked about and Peter Krause had talked about it early on, that to him, SmartyCam was like the go-to thing. If you had 5 minutes, where are you going to go? SmartyCam was the thing, and you follow along with that as well. And then there's other people that I think somebody chatted about it, and certainly how I got into the SmartyCam side a little bit more is it was still data first, and then if I couldn't figure something out, I went to the SmartyCam as that why, what happened, where did it happen, why did it happen, and the SmartyCam helped me see, oh, he got a little bit of curb, or his entrance was not quite perfect, or whatever it happened to be. But I think I've kind of turned around on that as well. But interesting again, that what is so cool about this is, and it's what makes it so hard on our software engineers, Emiliano sitting here in the background, that there are so many different learning styles, and they have to build software that is available for all these different functions for people that need different ways of getting to that data. So pretty interesting stuff. So what I'm going to do now, James, I'm going to stop the share, and then you will go ahead and grab, if I get the right button, there we go. You should be able to share your screen, and we're going to take a look at some examples, which is always fun.
Great. Oh, so we've jumped into the best part that we'll go to later. So we're going to go to that one later. So let me get back down to my start screen that is here.
Shouldn't have practiced before we started, right? The last 10 minutes, that screwed us up.
Had a bit of a play around before, which is all good. There's Ray Studio 3 Analysis is putting it all together, which was so much fun playing with the data on that earlier today. So let's talk about step one. Let's talk about the beginner piece. Now, I love SmartyCam data. This is just a video that I have. Can you still see it?
We're seeing it well, yes.
All right, lovely. So I've stopped it in a place here where I'm going to go through two corners. And the reason I like this is if somebody said, okay, so what did you feel, what was going on the track? These two corners are very interesting, and I'll show you why. So hopefully it's playing on the screen. You can see a nice smooth brake. How do I go to throttle? All nice and smooth. That's all good. No hesitation. That's all good. Then I get here. This is not bad as well. So I'm feeling really good at this point. And then watch what happens on the throttle trace coming through this corner. Oh, yep, no, yep, no, yep, no. So it's things like that. Now that's as simple as possible to be able to show. But what we're seeing here is we're seeing the data in relation to driver input, and we're seeing it where they're doing it on track. Now, what was interesting as we went through this data was, for me, as somebody with the SmartyCam piece, was if you had a GoPro, for example, something, I was totally flat through that corner going up the hill. Everything was good. In fact, this is a corner that we've used in previous sort of scenarios, because Roger said, oh, James is short shifted there. Why has he done that? And you can see this is because this is where we go up the top of the hill. And if anyone remembers the confidence corners I've been talking about, I wanted to show this one as well, is that's what you can see. And the track might be going to the left or the right. This was a fun track to learn the first time round. It was like, where does it go? Where does it go? Oop, not there. But in many respects, what we've seen is the same data in terms of hesitance on the throttle or inconsistent throttle input. And as I got more comfortable with data, this was useful for me, someone who's going quickly. But if I wanted to be able to show something very quickly, this was a great way of being able to show track and driver input and steering all in the same place. And so for a lot of people, this is a great way of doing it. But this is something that a lot of people, may not have. They may have started out using something else. And so what I wanted to show was a similar sort of set of data. Now, unfortunately, I don't have this data in the display, but what I do have is I have 2 sessions, which I've put in here from actually Castle Combe, so that track we were talking about just earlier. And if many of you can actually see that there's something going on with this lap, that there with the blue lap, as relates to these particular laps. And so if I show someone this data straight out, there may be an element of what exactly are you showing me that's going on here? For those of us who know what's happening here, we're like, oh, very straightforward. What happened here? Was I following somebody? Did I chicken out? Was I, having a bit of a moment? Over time, the SmartyCam would have fixed a lot of this for me. I wish I'd had it plugged in at the time, but it's one of those moments I didn't have it with me. But at the same time, as someone who can read data very quickly, I know here, in fact, I know actually what happened. I nearly rear-ended somebody. You can see that here. Not that I'd ever do that on a racetrack, no. But in essence, you can see that what happens is I overslow dramatically for this corner, and you can see that from the time distance. But for some people looking at this, they're like, oh my God, that just looks like lines and spikes and peaks and troughs, especially for a beginner. So you have this lovely feature here where I've got the data again, and I'm going to bring it all the way back. So I'm going to start the lap here, and just to show you over here, I have the 2 laps themselves lined up. One happens to be in red, one happens to be in blue. These are the laps, this is the speed, and this is what's happening on the brake that you can see. Now, if I press play on this one, this is one of my favorite features for showing people who want context, because they know that the dots are the cars on the track, and they know the track because they've just driven it. So look what happens to these 2 right here. So while I was on here going, oh, okay, well, I saw straight away, as did many of you, that if I went to the measures graph here, hold on a second, having a bit of a clicking moment there, that this happened straight away. It's about half a second here that happened, overslowed. And you can see the speed trace. For some people, they can't see that, but what they can see is they can now see that the blue dot is further ahead than the red dot, and that it's about half a second that's come down here, and this is the distance. And if I was running it, I could actually see the brake pressure when it was applied and the GPS speed. And so this particular tool, for somebody who is in this phase of I'm just starting to figure it out, plus I'm a visual learner and I love what I'm looking at, this honestly is one of the best tools that we don't talk about enough. Because for somebody, and I don't know if we do, Roger, or not, and you can say if we do or don't, but I particularly love this as a beginner and entry level sort of tool.
It's funny that we have not done a webinar on this. We do in some seminars and some other things. Obviously, we do chat about it. But I was introduced to this. It was not one that I used a lot when I first started doing data and started chatting with people. But then I went to some karting events, and I had some dads that were coming up to me, and boy, my daughter's looking at the data and she can't quite get it. She sees the video, just not very much video in karting, but this task here for the junior drivers certainly, but maybe it was the entire time it was just people that didn't understand data well, right? And they would see this and they would immediately now understand because of the gap of the 2 dots, and then just a couple of channels, not overwhelming, but yet a visual on all of a sudden there's a gap in difference of position on the track. So I've written a note here as we've been chatting about this that that I put lap replay into my back pocket as a webinar topic that maybe we bring up and spend an hour on and chat about the differences. So
it'd be fun to do. I mean, I think that it's something that, and I'm sure there's features that I don't use that are on here. So that is sort of like the step 1. Now there are others that are on there, and we'll go through. One of them that I have here now. Here's a quick tip for those of you like me who click around but didn't find this button. If you use not Race Studio 3 analysis, not the beta version, but the regular everyday version, if you click on the data download option, I wonder if I can even see it in there. I'll show you later. Don't want to mess up my demos. In the data download option, you can tell it to download the data as a Google file now, so you don't have to manually export the data in Race Studio to analysis. And then you do your Google Earth. You can have it every time you download the data, we'll also download it as a Google file, so you can have that available to you when you need it, which if you're anyone like me who loves being able to play with this feature, this is the next stage. Now, I haven't downloaded and done it. We've talked about it before, but this is genuinely one of the most popular videos. I'll tell you the other two videos that I have that people watch quite a lot is the first one is a hands-on how to configure a Solo 2, and the second is how to download your data from a Solo 2. Every month, those are the two that people love the most. And then the third one is this one. It's how do I use Google Earth to be able to get my data in a way that's there. And the reason that people love this, and when I show them, is that, again, not only does it start bringing in the context of the track, but it also brings in the actual track itself. So people can see the exit curbing, they can see the apex, they can see the line and everything they're going. They can also see the solar panels at Castle Combe here, which you actually can't see when you're 2 inches off the ground.
I was actually going to ask you, was that a racetrack, or was that a perimeter road for the solar panel farm? I wasn't too sure.
It's an old airfield. So many of the tracks are old sort of World War II airfields, but that's definitely one. But interesting that you can see that this is one that people love. And I haven't got the sidebar open here, but if I did, I can go in here, and many of you may know this, but you can right click in these and you can go into properties and you can change the color, just like you would do in Race Studio Analysis itself. And then you have your information. So the red lap is there and you can see what that was going. So again, for those people who want that, oh, okay, now I get it. Now I can see what you're doing. And remember, a lot of people who are just starting out with data may never have ever looked at the line that they're taking and thought, okay, maybe that's different to somebody else, or maybe that's a different line that I'm doing, or something else that's happening. So this is a really useful feature. So these are some of the basic ones. I'm not going to go through all of them in each of the steps because I'm conscious of time that is there. But as said, in my experience, if I'm showing people stuff, and I got to tell you, if no one's ever plugged in a Solo before and you plug it in, you download the data and you show them this and the lap replay and a few other things, it is almost immediately that switchover point that the data is somehow useful to me.
Valuable. Yep.
Then you start moving them up the advancement curve in terms of what's going on, because now it's tangible. I can relate to it. I know what those lines are for. The last thing I was going to say, and it goes back to our Race Studio Analysis, is that I also have in here, I'm going to go back to the measures graph, but I always keep with me a couple of basic ones for who I'm showing. Now, I will share these with anyone who wants to be able to see them, but I have this one, which I love, GPS Basic, which if I load it up, anyone remember earlier I was saying that I like for basic sort of like, you know, inputs of drivers. You can see here, anyone know what I'm doing here? I'm just double clicking on the actual graph and it will move and realign your chart. I'm sure you all knew that, but some people are like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. You can see here that, remember I said, oh, overbreak, look at this sort of area here associated with here. It's just simple visuals that you can use to be able to say down, slow, up, far, up, you know, down is slowing down and up is speeding up. Again, visuals and slowly bringing people in is really interesting to be able to do so. Now, I know a lot of you know this sort of stuff, but it's important to be able to not overwhelm people, because I genuinely do see it. Someone opens up a page that probably looks a little bit like this. And the conversation usually goes, and Peter Krause has done a great webinar here, which said James is using too many measures. He's often right. It's too much to take in. But I've seen people trying to, and this bit here, and this bit here, and we're doing this bit over here. And people are just like, whoa, hold on, hold your horses. I can't quite know what's going on. That's really important to be able to know. So that's step one in terms of the beginner. I want to get more into the advanced conversation. So I'm actually going to stay on this channel a little bit more, because I think this is where you start bringing in the aspects of, you know, things like the channels report. Now, I like the channels report because sometimes it gives me really useful information. And this, it's interesting that maybe I should have this one in the more advanced, I don't know, but if you're showing people data, this is a useful reference, even if you help them set up the math channels and stuff, is that if you notice that I have certain pieces of information that are on here, and this is just GPS based, but you can see here I have the distance on throttle, the time on throttle, and then you can start showing people, okay, this is not a visual reference, but I can show you that your average speed here was 87.3 and this one was 88 miles an hour. And I can also show you, for example, that in this lap, it happens to be the lap where of the two, you're on the throttle for the longest amount of distance and time. And you put that 53.2 seconds rather than 50. And now you can say, oh, I'm doing this. And I was talking to somebody the other day who was, I think, very hesitant in one of the corners at the track I was at. And we did some analysis. It was in the rain. So understandably, it was a lot of like, ooh. And just to be able to say you were off the throttle 1,000 feet less than your other drivers just gives you the indication that, you know, there are things that people can see in terms of reading now the data and being able to see it that get people to the point. But if I showed somebody this to start out with, they'd be like, okay, that's useful and all, but where, when, how, what, where? Yep. But if you're like me and you start to be able to advance it and you're like, okay, I'm comfortable with the track and on my break points, maybe I'm doing a bit of coasting. Interestingly, there's less coasting here than there is here. And we've talked about these sort of solutions that are here. The channels report is a very useful tool to be able to sort of look at this. But I think that, you know, bringing this into the conversation is important, but not straight away. That's sort of the most sort of key aspect.
But again, depending on the learning style, right? So it's, you know, some people, a panel like this Excel spreadsheet look is just immediately the light bulb goes on, right? So again, back to, boy, just what is your learning style? And then there's lots of tools to try to hit the one that's important to you.
Totally agree. And I think the interesting thing as well, when we start thinking about math channels, I think math channels they fall into two buckets. There are those people who can write them and use them and write them from scratch to solve a problem that they have. And I have to be honest, I am so far away from being one of those people that I am very much somebody who's like, I love exactly what that data is showing me right there. Could you tell me what that math channel is? And I know how to then put it into the tool and set it up. I think that if you get to advanced math channels, that's where you're like, hey, I'd like to be able to solve this particular problem with these variables and this data. Honestly, that is something which I have just absolute admiration for people who can do that, because it's such a skill. For me, it just gives me the opportunity of being able to learn something different. And to put that into context, there's one other thing which I think starts to get into a fun part, which I've only started playing with recently, and Roger showed me this, is that I actually have GSUM as a math channel set up. And this is one that has been on my mind for a long time in terms of, I kind of get it, but I don't, but I do, but I don't, but I do, but I don't. And then I fell into a conversation that Roger was helping me with, and he said, okay, so put it into the GPS channel.
You have your per lap color on, that's why it's not working. There you go.
And yeah, and change it into, turn off per lap color. And then you can adjust your variable here, and you can start seeing if you're doing a good or a bad job in terms of being able to use the maximum amount of potential grip that is available from the car. And I was like, oh my God, now all of a sudden, as a visual learner, the GPS or the GSUM that appeared in the measures graph, I kept looking at it going, bit squiggly, not sure if it's smooth. And then I turned it into a colorful chart, and immediately I'm like, okay, totally get it.
Upper right corner looking corner looking very good. Lower left corner, there's an issue, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. This is a corner called tire where you quite often see people buried under the tire. So there's an element of ooh and then ooh, and so this to me immediately brought home a new feature that was there, and it's sort of going again into the GSUMs existed as a baseline. But even me as somebody who's a different type of learner, now I'm getting into, okay, I'm starting to understand the data. I know what I should be looking at, but now I just need a different way of being able to learn and see that data as well. So that's the last thing that's there, which I think is important. The last aspect that I wanted to be able to talk about as well with this is being able to look at some key aspects. And I know we're coming up on time, is that as you start taking people to the more advanced side, I don't need to bring those in. The only thing that's really in that sort of bring you back again, Lance, bringing you back again, is being able to develop those formulaic approach to math channels and everything that is there. Is there's one thing that I wanted to be able to talk about, which I just learned recently. And this is something which I know Emiliano's on, so hopefully it evolves into Race Studio 3 analysis as well. Is that if you go back to the measures graph, and I'm going to turn the per lap color on, there's one key aspect that visual learners really love, and I've learned this and then I immediately related to it. And it's sort of to do with, and I'll show you this one if I put it into this one here. This is the one that I use most of the time right now. I'm driving a Formula Ford. I can, it's called outlining. And for a visual learner in particular, which nearly half of us on this call said we related to the most, is an outline of how we look at data. And then we think back to Roger's formula, which is, associated with, the what, where, and why type of aspect of what's happening, where's it happening, why is it happening. That's referring to an outline. And so for many of us who are visual learners, we need the data in a way that we can relate to. Now, it doesn't matter what order you put it in for your own style of learning. But for me, I've had this same order of how data has been set up for quite some time now. And basically, I've always loved to have speed at the top, then RPMs, then throttle, then brake. And that's the way my brain always goes to many of these things, because that's how I like to outline the data as I'm looking at it. And so I immediately do this. I look at what's happening here, I go up, and then I go down. And that's how I learn. And so it's really important. It's called outlining. I just learned about this one. And as soon as I read it, I was like, oh, that totally relates to me, which is I like the order of the data. I like it in a particular style. And so this is really important as you think about when you set up your particular views. Now, the key is that if you're setting this up for somebody else as well, they may have a different approach. And so I'm going to leave you with, before I hand back to Roger, some thoughts on this, which is, first and foremost, know how you learn. But second, more than anything else, is if you're showing somebody else the data, they may not get it the same way that you do. So work through which ways of these data. Remember I said earlier, I had sort of like a menu of different ways of being able to look at the data. Would you like to look at this way, or this way? Sometimes you get to that aha moment, but hopefully a lot of these steps, which is, start out video, visual, I can relate, I can join the dots. That for me right now, to give you an example, I know exactly where every single spot of this is at Castle Combe. Not every spot, but you get what I mean. I know which corners they are. I know where they are. I know the layout of the track, and I can relate to the input. I don't need to see a lap replay analysis. I can see it straight away. I would love to be able to see this sometimes in the SmartyCam data as well, because I can relate to that very quickly. And the reason being, but to finish this all off, I wanted to be able to show just one last thing, and that's this. Sometimes you may not, or in the future, you may not need to be able to figure it out with somebody, because it may all be there for them. And that's the beauty of the Race Studio 3 analysis that I have here. Now, this is Matt's data, and I picked 2 laps, and I picked these 2 laps for a particular reason, which was on this lap here, you can see at this point, so this is, I just picked 3. So for me, I'm sort of upside down. I'd like this one here, then this one, then this one, but that's okay. So, that's just how I learn in terms of what it is, but this is how the data shows up right now. And so you can see that on a GPS speed here, in fact, let's start at the time distance. So blue and red doing okay here. And then all of a sudden the red's faster, and then it starts to lose a bit of speed here. Now, many of us looking at that data would be like, oh, okay, Matt tried to take too much speed into this corner, and I can see that here with the GPS speed. And while the blue lap may have overslowed, it went to power here, whereas the red lap tried to carry the speed, and while carrying the speed still went to power a little bit later, which is there. And that's all useful. And you can see down the straightaway, all of a sudden that's there. Now that's me reading the measures graph. But for some people, they may be like, okay, well, I want a bit more context. Where is that on track? So we have the GPS overlay that's down here. And please don't freeze on me now, which it has, which is fine. Oh, no, it hasn't. There we go, which is lovely. And I don't mean that for the software. I mean it for the fact that I've got so many windows open and I'm talking to all of you. And so what the best part of this is I can actually run the data here and actually watch what happens here. So you can see the data here. These are the 2 laps. That lap's perfect. Look where Matt is here. Look, let me just pause that and bring it back again. I'll do it again. So turns in, hits apex, tried to roll too much, hits apex here, tries to roll too much speed. Oh no, I've gone way too far. Sorry about that. Matt's probably on there going, yeah, did that on purpose, because I would have done it on purpose. Right.
there.
So
Yeah,
this
right
is
there.
exactly, this is where we are. The GPS has shown that it's come out wide here. You can see where the track is by the lighter shade of gray that is here rather than the darker. You can see that this is using all the road, but not too much. This one is using a lot more on the outside. And if I run this video through, there's actually quite a sharp turn to be able to avoid this bollard that is right here. And so all of a sudden now I can see all aspects of this particular corner that are here and what impact it has down the straightaway. And you can notice that the time actually starts to, really sort of lose out a little bit here. Now, I wanted to show one more thing as we go through this, because I love this example that is here, is that watch this bit right here. And we talk about visual learners who just want a quick glance. Now, Matt has got all of the settings. He's got a dash here and the lap down here, all sorts of stuff in the car, which is lovely. But for some people, they may not want that. But if you watch what happens here, keep an eye on this here. It may be blurry on the screen, but you may have noticed that when we hit this 10th here of the time lost, notice this little red light comes up here. Matt is using a shift light indicator to be able to tell him quite quickly visually if he's up or down on the particular lap. And because he was unable to get to power here, he lost about a 10th going down here, and you can see that starts to appear. So for somebody who doesn't want to read all of this, just wants a quick visual reference, now all of a sudden the hardware is also given the opportunity to visualize the data in a different way, depending on how you take the data in and how you want to be able to absorb it. And so this is going to be the beauty of the Race Studio 3 analysis as you go forward, that you can see all of it combined together. And again, I didn't want to, it's funny, it looks like I'm critiquing Matt's line through here. It's not. Basically, let's say it the other way, Rich, this is really nice, and this one was a bit of experimentation, which is what we all do. But in many instances, this is a great indicator of the fact that you can look at the data all in different ways. And so the key is going to be figuring out how to be able to configure this in the future that works for you, for how you learn, and then for how the people that you teach learn. This might be too much to start off with, but in many instances, this for me personally is going to be the absolute, best part of having all of this together. So there you go. So that's all I have today, Roger. I didn't know if you had anything else.
Oh, perfect. Let me go ahead and go ahead and stop your sharing, so
Yep.
that I can grab that back. And let's go to the presentation materials. Let's see here. There was one question. Tice was asking what this arrow was here. We did talk about it a little bit earlier, Tice. It's just when you get so up to a point where you think you know what's going on, or you're feeling pretty comfortable, then all of a sudden something will shock you back to being oh, okay, I need to learn a little bit more, right? And so this little arrow here was kind of interesting that James added that boy, once you get to this skilled phase, this unconscious competence, that all of a sudden you end up with a learning profile happens, right? And especially as you're teaching other people, you end up with, you know what, I don't quite fully understand that. Let me try that again. And then
Someone
Bruce asked a question.
Once upon a time. Sorry, Roger.
Go ahead, James.
Someone taught me once upon a time on this one was that often relates to things that we do every day and we don't even think about it. Like any of us who drive, a manual gearbox on our car, we don't think every time we change gear, we just do it.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden something happens. Yeah, something happens.
And then we get, right? Yeah. We get onto a racetrack, all of a sudden something's happening. And now all of a sudden we start thinking about, should I be in third or fourth here? And it takes a while to get more. And so I think with developing an understanding of the software that we have, I've personally been here with certain amounts of data to where I've got comfortable with, maybe even a bit complacent, and then gone back again.
I have seen this particular step happen so many times in data with drivers, that both from the SmartyCam side and the data side, they think everything is golden. They think they're doing everything right, but there's so much happening to you, coming at you in a race car, at speed, that all of a sudden you finally look at your data, whether it be SmartyCam or measures graphs or GPS maps or whatever, and you notice that, boy, under braking, I'm doing something there I didn't even realize I was doing, and then boom, you drop back a couple of steps and you do it again, right? So perfect. Let me jump down to kind of start to close this out a little bit. All of our stuff is going onto YouTube, and we do it within a gosh, usually within an hour or so. We have the video of the one that we just recorded. Make sure you visit. There's a couple of questions there we chatted about that we did answer that were maybe we even hit upon a little bit earlier in the webinar. So make sure that you take a look at that. So take a look at our stuff all out there. 123 videos there and growing all the time. So just tons of information there. Customer support, boy, the season is we're into fall and things are happening, but boy, we our folks are out there at the racetrack every single weekend, and of course always available to you at the 800 number. Give us a call. We'll help you. We'll figure it out. Help you get through some of these other issues that you might run into. So the next thing is our next webinar, something always kind of fun to do here at the end and chat about a little bit. The next webinar is going to be this coming Thursday, October 15th. We're going to talk about the aimsports PDM. We're going to have Fabrizio back again. We're going to talk about it's our update number 2. We promised you updates on the PDM and Race Studio 3 analysis about once a month. We're not certainly hitting those dates exactly, whatever they kind of fit in. But Fabrizio is going to come back, talk about a little bit about a few more of the options that are available to us. We'll talk about maybe some software upgrades, some hardware upgrades, some things that are happening, and we'll chat about it and learn a little bit more about the PDM. It's a new product to a lot of you, so we're going to talk about a lot more of the inputs and some of the other things as it relates to the PDM. So visit us here in a couple of days and learn a little bit more about the PDM. Bring your questions and look forward to that. So finally, at the end, it looks like James has locked up, at least on my screen. Hopefully he's still there. But we're going to call it a day here, but there's the contact information. If you have some, James looks like he's back to me. Looks like we have contact information here for myself or for James, and of course all of the different social media things that belong to the rest of it. I appreciate you doing all the hard work, James. You have educated us in the previous 4, but and then again on this 5th one that you've done so far. This one here was pretty darn interesting for a lot of people. So is there anything else you'd like to add kind of on as we close it up, James?
Can you hear me all right, by the way?
I can.
Okay, lovely. Sorry. I had a meltdown just at the right time, actually, or after the demo.
Okay. It's
perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, I just love feedback on this one, so feel free to email me or anything like that. This is the first time we've done something like this, so I'm sure there were some sort of rough edges, and I personally want to clean a few things up that are here. But yeah, if it's useful, or if you want to be able to see something different, or you've got different experiences, I'd just love to hear from people. So send me an email or something if you're interested in doing so, because I'd also love to know if there are things that you thought were not right as well, so we can advance and develop that too. So yeah, really appreciate just having the chance to be here and to talk to everyone again.
And we do appreciate it very much, James. I know everybody else does as well. These learning styles, this was something that was pretty interesting. If it's something you'd like for us to maybe take another stab at it in a while, maybe take it to the next level a little bit more, let us know in some emails, and look forward to doing that again. Again, thanks everybody for coming. I think we got through most of the questions. If there's anything else you'd like to know, make sure you just drop James or I a note. Thanks for everybody for coming. Look forward to seeing us all on Thursday for the update number 2 on the PDM. Looking forward to that. Thanks everybody for coming, and we will see you at the next one.
Thank you.